Now, one reason I'm very suspicious about these tough stay-home bans is because some of the officials telling us to obey them don't seem to think these rules apply to them. We've already seen Scotland's chief medical officer resign after being busted twice driving to a holiday home. In New Zealand, the health minister was demoted after being photographed driving out to a mountain for some cycling. In New South Wales, Minister Don Harwin was forced to quit for driving to his holiday home. And now Britain's Professor Neil Ferguson, the epidemiologist who helped shape Britain's coronavirus lockdown strategy, has also had to quit after his married lover came a couple of times to visit him at his home. A booty call. And all this after this same bloke told everyone else, stay home.
We will have to maintain some level of social distancing, significant level of social distancing, probably indefinitely until we have a vaccine available.
Joining me is Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spike. Now, I always call him Britain's sharpest political commentator for a very good reason. He is. Brendan, lovely to see you. What's Neil Ferguson's excuse?
Oh, my goodness. What a hypocrite. He just comes off as a raging, sanctimonious hypocrite. It's mind-blowing. You know, this is the guy whose doom-mongering models, which predicted 500,000 deaths in the UK if we didn't lock down, his models were used by the government to shut down the whole of society and to shut down the economy. That means loved ones can't visit each other. That means families are torn apart. That means couples who don't live together can no longer visit each other. And yet, in defiance of the government's own advice, which he is largely responsible for, as you say, he's been having these booty calls. His married lover has been visiting him. It is just such a staggering level of hypocrisy. And I think it really demonstrates that there is a certain section of society, you know, the kind of clever, privileged elite, who think that certain rules should apply to us, the plebs, but not necessarily to them. So there's a real arrogance to this.
I wonder whether I'm going too far in thinking, Brendan. I mean, you know, men's minds go to mush when faced with a beautiful woman. That's true. So, you know, I sort of think, well, but does this suggest, nevertheless, that Neil Ferguson doesn't actually think that Britain's, 500,000 people will die if people actually were allowed to leave their homes?
That's the real question. Yeah, I think that's the real question here. That's fundamentally what I think we need to ask, because if you aren't following the guidelines yourself, if you aren't adhering to the lockdown, then it does suggest that you don't think it's necessary. And it does suggest that you are at least skeptical of it. You know, the real issue here is, you know, I have a tiny amount of sympathy for Neil Ferguson because there are people across the country who want to visit lovers and friends, and some of them are actually doing that. We know this for a fact. But, you know, what we should really be taking him to task for is his scaremongering and his models, and also politicians who turned those models into a kind of biblical writ that no one was allowed to question, and which forced us into this catastrophic lockdown. You know, his model, for example, predicted that Sweden would have around 40,000 deaths by now. It actually has around 2,700. It increasingly looks like Western societies have been shut down and have had mass unemployment, and the economy has been brought to a standstill on the basis of dodgy, scaremongering models. And I think Neil Ferguson and those who listen to him have an enormous amount to ask for once this crisis has passed.
And for those who haven't followed this debate, the reason why the exaggeration of the potential death toll in Sweden is so important here is that Sweden chose, unlike all the countries around it, not to lock down people, to let them go and shop and let them get out of their home. And you're quite right, the apocalypse did not descend on Sweden, although its death rate is higher than some of its neighbours. That is true. But in the long term, will that be the case? Now, Britain's death toll, though, is the highest in Europe now, nearly 30,000, although Italy still per capita, being a smaller country, the death rate per capita is actually worse still. But how is that playing out politically in England, in Britain?
It's playing out in a really interesting way, actually. There's still a lot of support for Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. In fact, recent surveys suggest that their support is higher than it has. The Conservative Party's support is higher than it has been for a very long time. So most people are trusting that the government is trying its best against a difficult disease, which is impacting on Britain in a disproportionate way, for fairly obvious reasons, in my view. We have a dense population in comparison with other European countries. We have London, which is a global hub, unlike any other city in Europe. So there are reasons it's hit us in the way that it does. And I think most people trust that Boris and his government are doing everything they can. Of course, what we have among the cynical left is an attempt to exploit these deaths to score political points against the Tory party and to really bash Boris. And I think a lot of people find the exploitation of death and sickness and the exploitation of a novel virus, which is still very unpredictable, I think people find that really off-putting, and it's really making them turn against certain sections of the media, turn against certain sections of the left, and actually line up behind Boris and his efforts to combat COVID-19.
Well, my daughter just sent me photographs overnight from Cardiff in Wales, and it looked like a beautiful town, like a ghost town, almost nobody there. It looked like Bruges on a Sunday or Adelaide on Christmas Day, no one there. Is there any pressure to ease these restrictions, or are Britons really taking this to heart and huddling like, don't go outside, nuclear winter sort of territory?
It's quite worrying. I think there are two problems in the UK at the moment. First, there is the problem of COVID-19 and the sickness it is causing. And secondly, there's a problem of a climate of fear. And lots of surveys and polls now suggest that people will be reluctant to go back to work and reluctant to go back to social life, even when the disease has been suppressed and even when the lockdown has been lifted. I'm worried that the scaremongers in the political class and the media class have been so successful that they've made some people feel a bit scared of normal life. I do think it's time for us to grow up. We can't hide from a virus forever. Life is full of risk. And I think it's time for us to grow up, go outside, go back to work, and resuscitate the economy.
I agree. Brendan O'Neill, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.